You're listening to Greater Good Radio Hawaii. Please visit us online at greatergoodradio.com. Today's guest is Admiral RJ ZAP Zlatoper.
What's the best example that you've seen of your 4 management principles actually coming through and creating results?
Well, you can't go anywhere without a plan, a goal. You have to have a goal.
Like your own personal experience where you applied it, it worked. Maybe a story for that.
Good. Well, my whole story, I ended up as a 4-star admiral, but my goal when I came into the Navy has been a series of steps. My initial goal was to get into flight training and become a Navy pilot. Mm-hmm. And I managed to obtain that. It took me 2 years, and I worked very hard. And maybe as a side note on that, the Navy said, you know, if you work very hard, you get at the top of your aviation class, you'll get your choice. And I was at the top of my graduating class in aviation school, and they didn't give me my choice because there weren't any slots. I wanted to go fly F-8 fighters, and they didn't have any of those slots available that week that I came up, so they put me in a thing called an A6, which was very depressing to me because it was an ugly airplane. It was a new airplane. It was a jet that flew off of aircraft carriers. It turned out to be a marvelous airplane for me. I flew it the whole 30 years that I was in the Navy. And so it worked out well. There's almost a Celestine prophecy to this, and that fits back into it. I had a goal, and I had a plan, was to get to that next level, was work hard at school and get through flight training and take care of people. The only people I had were classmates at the time. And I became a Navy pilot. Then my next goal was to become the commanding officer of a squadron. And I worked hard at that, and I did the jobs that I had, and they sort of fed into that. And once I became the commanding officer of a squadron, I said I'd like to be an air wing commander. So I had a group of personal goals, but they never interfered with what was my real goal, which was to make the squadron that I was in the best squadron in the Navy. And then when I got to an air wing, to make that the best air wing in the Navy, so all of us benefit from that. And then when I became an admiral, I had a carrier battle group to have us all work together to be the best carrier battle group. So it wasn't a personal kind of thing. And then the promotions just sort of came along.
You said your ultimate goal was to make your group or your squadron the best. Yes. But when you made your goals or those little steps to getting to a certain position, how did you know you wanted to be in that position? Is it because somebody was a mentor and they made such an impact on your life? You said, you know, that's something that I'm interested in.
Yes. The short answer, Gary, was I had mentors along the whole way. I always had someone that I worked for or with that I really respected, that I could sit down and talk and say, I would like to be like that person. My first commanding officer was a guy who I still stay in touch with to this day. We email almost on a daily basis. And a guy named Bob Mandeville, retired as a 2-star admiral, as a matter of fact. I was happy when he made flag because he was a great leader. He was a commander when I met him, and he brought us all along, and I sat there and watched what he did. And I also talked to him on the side. And he also gave me one of my good lessons in the military. I was a Navy ROTC graduate. The Navy paid my way through college. I was the first person in my family to go to college. My parents were all very pleased. My dad was a hard worker that came from nothing and did wonderfully well, but no one had ever been to college. The Navy paid my way through school, so I owed them 3.5 years or 4 years of service when I graduated, and I said, well, why not add another year and fly an airplane? So I did that. And then I went into the Navy and flew. And I did my job as best I could, and I worked hard. And I decided, well, I have to pay my time back. I'm going to get a job and get out. My mother said, you know, shouldn't you get a real job? When you're in the Navy like this, it's good to serve your country, but you have a real job. So I actually put in resignation papers to leave the Navy, and I got a job with IBM. I was going to go to work up in Poughkeepsie, New York, where passion comes into. I wasn't passionate about it, although I was a math and physics major in college, and I liked quantitative things. And IBM this would have been 1967, was a very exciting place to be going. I mean, but nonetheless, I wasn't passionate about it. Well, Bob Mandeville, this guy that was my mentor, pulled me aside one night, and he said, Zap, why are you leaving the Navy? I said, well, because I should go get a job. He said, look, if you're leaving to go to something that you really want to go to do, I'm going to be your biggest backer. But if you're just leaving this to go do something else because you don't like necessarily what you're doing right now, he said, then I'm going to sit down and talk to you about it. So I said, well, talk to me. And so he said, well, you do a very good job. And I said, you know, Skipper, you're the first guy that's ever really pulled me aside and said that overtly to me, gave me that feedback. I said, I thought I was doing pretty well, but nobody. And he said, we really want you to stay in the Navy, and I want you to, you know, make my Navy be better. And it was that thing that triggered me in a major way in my life. That's been very important to me from now on. I always try to make, and I'm sure that there's anyone that's hearing or watching this that's worked for me and said, ZAP never really said that to me, but I apologize to them, but I have tried to make that a big thing, feedback on how you're doing. If you're doing well, people want to hear you're doing well. If you're not doing so well, it's even more important. I've always said it should never be a surprise when evaluation time comes around if I give you a bad evaluation. That's my fault, because we should have talked about that well before so you'd have the chance to move on. But I took that one small thing, and that fits in two ways, Evan. The small example being that for me personally, I said, okay, I'm taking this away. They like me. I'm going to stay in the Navy. I withdrew my resignation papers and stayed for another 30 years, or actually 28 years.
Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for more on Greater Good Radio.